Trevor Mallow.
Speaker, a couple of points I want to make about previous speakers, and without getting into any detail about presence or absence of members, it used to be a tradition in this House that ministers, when they were making the first speech on a bill, would listen to the response, would be in the House listening to the response in order to be briefed by their officials and to work with their colleagues on the team. Mr Speaker, I could tell that the Minister, Mr Macleay, in charge of this bill, was not listening and communicating with later speakers on the legislation. And I think that's a pity, it's a loss, and because, Mr Speaker, ministers used to think that the House took some priority for their time, and in fact there used to be a requirement for many more government members to be present in order for there to be a quorum, and I think it's a pity that that is not the case at the moment. Mr Speaker, I now want to turn to Paul Goldsmith, the person who sacrificed his seat so that the major ethical supporter of the National Party, John Banks, could come to this Parliament, and refer him to his comments by way of interjection, and in fact I think during his speech at the committee stages, which said that as chair of the committee there is a lot of the detail in the bill he didn't understand. Well, Mr Chairman, what is the point? What is the point of having a member who chairs the Finance and Expenditure Committee, who gets extra funding for doing it, who is meant to look after the process, and he admits to this House that he did not focus enough on this very important legislation to the point of being able to understand it? Well, Mr. Speaker, that is sad. I hear Maggie Barry going. Clearly, it's after lunch. Clearly, it is after lunch because Maggie Barry has had to have some of her stimulation. Mr. Speaker, there she goes again. And if we could have another clear example, and maybe the member, she got a bill out of the member's ballot this morning, and maybe she celebrated for 2 or 3 hours. She celebrated for 2 or 3 hours in the bar over lunch. But she does not need that sort of win to behave in the way that she is in the House today. She seems to do it without an excuse. But, Mr. Speaker, I do want to go back to the bill, and in particular, I want to focus on the child support part of the bill and say that any member who is worth their salt, who has been working in their electorate, would over the last year have been working with constituents who have been looking forward, sometimes for many years, to the changes that were meant to occur and have been deferred. Mr. Speaker, no one will ever describe the current system for child support as fair. It is not fair, Mr. Speaker. It does not take enough into account, and it is much too narrow in its effect, and does not take into account properly both sides of the custodial relationship. There was an agreement within this Parliament for a new system. Whether it's totally satisfactory or not, I don't think anyone would agree with that. I think it would be in the eyes of the beholder, and certainly people who are involved in custodial and support disputes will not agree that the new system is ideal. But the vast majority of reasonable people will agree that the new system is better and will be better than the one it is replacing. And people have been looking forward to it. All of us, I'm sure, have been sending out to our constituents copies of the changes that were to have occurred. And I'm feeling somewhat culpable, Mr. Speaker, because I relied on the word of the government and I relied on the decisions of this Parliament, and I shared them with my constituents, and they made their financial planning decisions based on them. And what do we have by way of an awful, grubby little SOP? We have Todd McClay coming to the House and taking away from parents an entitlement which had been established by this Parliament. Takes away from parents a decision of this Parliament without any consultation, without going to a select committee, and without, Mr. Speaker, even an apology, without an apology to those parents who had increased their mortgages, with those parents who had made schooling arrangements, with those parents who let their kids join clubs, who let their kids get involved in sports, which were slightly more expensive than what they could normally afford. Parents made a lot of spending decisions for themselves and for their children. Sometimes they bought a car and arranged to pay it off using the money which was to come in. Sometimes they did an extension to have a bedroom for the teenage children that they could have, so that they could be, so each of the kids, or the kids of different genders who are teenagers, could have their own rooms, and houses were extended. Some people shifted houses to places with higher rent. And now Todd McClay comes to the House and says, oh, sorry, the money which we agreed that you would have, you're now not allowed to get for 2 more years, and by the way, it will not be backdated. Mr. Speaker, which member opposite says that that is just and fair? Not one. There is not a single member opposite who is prepared to say that they agree with Todd McClay. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to be generous to Todd McClay, because he is not the minister who for most of the last 7 years has been in charge of developing the computer system for those changes to occur. Who was? That was Peter Dunn. Peter Dunn was the minister who was meant to be in charge of that computer system up until June last year. He spent $50 million. Peter Dunn has spent $50 million not on buying a computer system, but on overseas-based consultants. $50 million on overseas-based consultants spent by Peter Dunn. Who thinks that that is good value for money? And what has John Key done now that he's brought back Peter Dunn into his ministry? He has given him charge of the computer information systems and their oversight, not for Inland Revenue, but for the entire government.
What about data security?
He's in charge of data security, notwithstanding the fact that John Key has told the House that he thinks Peter Dunn is the person who leaked the Kitteridge report or made it available to a reporter. John Key has, in an act of desperation, brought Peter Dunn back into his ministry when we all know that Peter Dunn is a guilty man who is responsible for the parents of New Zealand not getting the amounts to which they are entitled, and their kids will suffer as a result, and there is not one National Party member opposite who is prepared to defend Peter Dunn from the accusations, from the facts of his ineptitude.
Dr. Russell Norman. Thank you, Mr Speaker. I stand here to speak on behalf of the Taxation Annual Rates, Foreign Superannuation and